Welcome to part 2 of the labor configurations training video for WinBidPro version 16 by GDS. Let's get more into the actual items in a labor configuration. So we go back to settings, labor configurations. We've got some that are already configured here. So let's just, for example, say we need to make one for, I just realized there's not one for a can stick system. So I can click on a screw spline configuration and hit copy. So when it copies it, it adds it to the list. It just gives you the text up here. So let's just call it can stick. And so from here, all we've done so far is just give it a new name, right? So now we can go into the individual items and see what we need to change. So for can stick, you figure our per joint cost is going to be a little bit less because you're just slipping the verticals into the receptors. So a lot less joints, basically just horizontals, may have shear blocks. So let's say we need to make that like 12 minutes instead, or even 10 minutes. So we're kind of cutting the time in half. So this is something that you would determine, you know, your guys can build, let's say a 4-panel opening with 2 horizontals in, you know, half the time that they could a standard screw spline system where the head and sills are getting screwed in place. So you would decide what those values need to be and then kind of review what the labor calculations are. And we can revisit that down here where it's applied to a certain elevation because it does give you a real-time value. So all those types of things. So fabrication time per joint might be a little bit less. You know, let's say it's 3 minutes instead of 5 because there's less joints to fabricate. And panel fab. So these are all kind of fudge factors per panel, just to get your labor to the point you want it to be if everything else is kind of accurate. So these are the kinds of things you do when you create a new labor configuration. So now the first thing is, I guess we need to get into more detail about, these are just names. So if I click here, let's say we click here to add a new one. So we're going to add a new one. We're going to say, let's just call it delivery. So we're going to have a labor for the elevation for delivery. Normally I would probably want to do this for a job, and I can put it in the markup report, which I'll show you in a second here. So for delivery, that's a good enough name. It would be miscellaneous, and it would be, let's say, per elevation. So to deliver, you know, so much material per elevation, let's call it 60 minutes. That's just an example of what you do. But basically, you've got a category, and to see these again, it's installation, fabrication, glazing, and miscellaneous. So we pretty much got all those things covered here. Glazing labor is basically saying it's per light per glazer. So for one person to handle and glaze a light of glass, it would take 20 minutes in a can stick system. So if it's a bigger piece of glass that requires 2 people to handle it based on our weight kind of limits here, then let's say it's a 70-pound piece of glass and it needs 2 people, then that means it's going to double your amount of time for that piece of glass for glazing. So it was 20 minutes for one person, so it's going to be 40 minutes for 2. So that's how the glazing labor works. And actually, while we're at it, let's go look at the glass table. I'm going to save this. Oh, I saved it already. So now we're going to close it, and we're going to go to catalogs, glass table. So this is where it's important when you're adding new types of glass. There's the makeup thickness, which if it's insulated glass, it's going to be like 1 inch, for example. You know, if it's impact, it'll be a little thicker, but that's your overall thickness of the unit. And then the material thickness is the total of all the panes of glass that make up that unit. So typically, you know, it's 2/4 inch pieces make up a 1 inch 1-inch insulated unit, so it's a 1/2 inch of material thickness. So this is how we can calculate the weight of the glass, because we know the size based on the drawings, and if we know the weight, then if we know the makeup or the total material thickness, we can calculate the weight. So once we do that, the labor tool here can figure out how heavy it is, and then how many people need to handle it, and then how long it's going to take per person to glaze. So that's in a nutshell how the glazing labor works in version 16. So it's pretty straightforward. You can obviously manipulate this number real easily. If your glazing labor is coming out high, then you want to look at your weight setting, here under this, but then also you can adjust this value pretty easily. If it only needs to be 17 minutes, then that's going to lower your labor for glazing. So different things like that. So let's look at this again. So for miscellaneous labor, or let's look at the perimeter per foot. So for caulking, so we've created a line called perimeter caulking. It's installation labor, and perimeter per foot is one of the settings for how it's applied. So the program obviously knows the perimeter footage of your opening, so it calculates total lineal feet of that by, say, 2 minutes per foot, and then it gives you a total of minutes for that particular task, which in this case is perimeter caulking. And remember, we can change our labor rates here. So for installation labor, that's where that would fall. If this is too low, we can make it $60. And remember, if it's for the job, if you're changing your labor rate for a specific job, then you would go here and change it for the current job that you're now in. But over here is where it's default for any new job. Basically, it's going to bring in these rates. So that's how your configuration is made. You're basically just listing all these different items, and between all these different categories and then the how it's applied, you should be able to account for every type of labor that's needed for a specific job. So, and remember, so these are elevation level settings. So this labor is getting applied to each elevation, and you can actually manipulate those values per elevation down here once it's been applied. And if you make a bunch of changes to your master configuration, then there was also a what am I thinking? There was also a way to, well, I guess if you want to change your rates but not all these other configuration settings, you can save and sync to the job. So really it's the same thing as this, only you would change your master and then say, oh, I might as well change that for the current job, then you save and sync. But if you don't want to save it to the master and you only want it to the job, this is where you would click on this tab. So hopefully that makes sense. But otherwise, on a per elevation basis, you can go in and change values here and add new line items. So that's any job per elevation, you can do that. So now on an actual job level, if you need to add labor for the entire job, whether it's rentals or lifts or scaffolding or whatever, we want to go to the markup report. So in the markup report, we can add an item just by clicking some miscellaneous charges. Now keep in mind you can also override labor values. So we've got our fabrication installation labor here. I can actually click that check and I can say, this needs to be $500. Installation labor needs to be $1,000. This is how you can basically just do your own labor by just entering a value. So, and then if we decide, oh, I want it to be calculated again, you just uncheck those. This is where you have your markup rate for labor, your sales tax, but any job specific, not elevation specific labor would go here. So I can say like lift rental, and then I can say it's $1,000. So that's going to add to your overall cost of the job, but it's going to be basically a miscellaneous charge. And then you can just keep adding those values. You can add a markup to that. You can even add sales tax to that. So that's where we recommend adding anything that's kind of job specific for what used to be labor in the old version 15 program, but or it was in the labor window, I guess. But now we've kind of moved that to the markup report because it the way labor's done in version 16 is more kind of based on elevation information. So all the calculations and how it's applied and all that is all elevation based. So if it's an overall job, the markup report kind of handles all those costs. And I think I covered this in the first video, but remember again that under reports at the very bottom here, we call it an elevation report just because it does break it down by elevation, but it also gives you obviously your job summary. So this is really your final labor summary, but it's also showing you elevation specific details. So that's pretty much it for labor. It's very flexible. You can create your own labor configurations. You can add and remove those line item categories and name them whatever you want. You can even add them at elevations specifically and not for a default. So you should be able to find a way to get your labor very, very accurate. So that's it for now. Thanks for watching.